Good evening. Welcome to TNC Radio.live. This is Building Strong Minds with Tom Kelly and Dr. Christopher Cortman. Dr. Cortman, it is great to have you here as always.
Good evening, Tom. I am happy to be here tonight.
Dr. Cortman is located in the great state of Florida. And,
yes, sir.
Works in the Syracuse area.
Sarasota
area.
Now, they moved Syracuse to New York when I wasn't paying attention.
Sarasota, Syracuse. You say tomato, I say tomato, whatever.
I've never said tomato, and I won't say Syracuse.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who says tomato, but anyway, we're happy to have you with us tonight. We've been talking and going to continue to talk over the course of the next few weeks about forgiveness and going through the acrostic that you've put together around forgiveness and all that. So I think we've worked on the F a lot. So what does the O in forgiveness stand for?
Funny you should ask. The O word is optimism, Tom. And optimism is the exact opposite, of course, of pessimism. And you want to get into it now, or do you want to just continue with an outline?
I suppose we could talk about optimism. Oh, well.
Fantastic. And you sound like Winnie the Pooh's buddy. What's his name?
Eeyore.
Eeyore.
He
not confused with optimism.
It's funny how difficult I find it to be around people who look at the future constantly as a horrible place. I don't look at it that way, and I think the older I get, the harder I find it to be around people who are pessimists.
Yeah, it's actually very draining. I was just reading something on that being around people who are very negative is tantamount to having all of the oxygen sucked out of the room.
Yeah.
Doesn't take very long before you feel like you've got to get away from them just to recover your own equilibrium. But the good thing about this is that you are not born in one of those two camps and that's it, like height or something that just can't be changed. One can learn optimism. And in fact, there is a very highly regarded book from an extremely well-respected psychologist, Dr. Marty Seligman. And his book is called Learned Optimism. And what he wants the reader to understand is that it is never too late to learn how to think more positively, more optimistically. And what we have now, Tom, is a slew of research to demonstrate why that would be a pretty good idea. And if you like, I'll dive into some of that if you need to wait on that a little bit.
No, absolutely. Let's jump right in.
Well, one of the things that really fascinated me from the beginning in doing some reading on optimism, again, optimism is the glass is half full. Optimists are less likely to suffer from chronic diseases. And I actually have an explanation for that. And that is the stress response begins with the perception of threat. And how it begins is the mind basically sends an alarm that we know as fight or flight. And the whole stress response begins. No problem there, because we are built to have that alarm go on as long as it doesn't happen too frequently, and more importantly, it doesn't last too long. But most of the things that stress us today, if you will, are things that last for a long time. It's not just the typical, I have a big test in the morning, and so the fight or flight goes on to give me the energy I need, or, somebody takes a fall and I need the strength to pick them up when I normally couldn't. Or even the fight or flight that comes when you're being pulled over by those flashing lights on the highway. Those things we're built for that. They're short term. But the stress response stays on when we have situations where we perceive the threat to continue. For instance, a high conflict marriage, which ends up bleeding into a high conflict divorce, or a sick person in the family who's not getting any better. And in fact, they may be in a long process of dying and in need of caregiving. Just such a drain on the caregivers and ultimately the entire family. Just having a situation of underemployment or an inability to manage the finances, and just always feeling like no matter how hard I work, not all of the bills get paid. And there's always this sense of financial doom and gloom, and one sickness away from being kicked out of my home for lack of a mortgage payment or a rent payment. The eviction process breathing down my neck. Those kinds of things keep the stress response on. And with optimism, when people think that things are going to be okay, or that things are going to work out, or that ultimately everything is part of the plan, or that there is a big plan, there is a big picture. Maybe people believe that they're in God's will, or maybe they believe that they believe in some type of fate that says things always end up for the best, or what comes around goes around, or something. If people have that kind of faith, that kind of belief, that kind of optimism, Tom, they don't keep the stress response on in the same way. So if you think of it that way, the stress response again goes from alarm reaction to resistance to exhaustion. And that's where there's a breakdown. And you have all kinds of breakdowns, from a mental depression to, a flare of diabetes to, lower back pain to a stroke, heart problems. And ultimately that leads to disease and to death. That's the only direction the stress response goes in. Old age is an accumulation of the stress response over the years. And if you think about some diseases that are stress related, like Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease doesn't happen until we hit our 60s or 70s, because we have to be here and have that stress response in a cumulative manner take its toll on a certain area of the brain. But that happens less to people who have an attitude of optimism.
Does optimism and happiness go hand in hand?
Optimists are much more likely to be happy and much less likely to be clinically depressed. They also don't die prematurely as frequently as pessimists do. And the most recent estimate that I read is that optimists do an 11 to 15% longer lifespan. I mean, this is just not just saying to somebody, come on, think on the bright side, Joe. You don't always have to be down about these things. Or that wonderful Monty Python song, always look on the bright side of life. This is actual clinical research that says when people think optimistically, they live longer. They recover from cancer better. They have better outcomes with pregnancy. They do better with chronic pain. They do better with cardiovascular illnesses. I mean, it's remarkable how many things people do better with. They recover and lower their stress levels much better than do pessimists. And they recover from depression. There's even a study where where children learning how to think optimistically were less likely to succumb to a clinical depression. And how do you think optimistically? Well, one of the things you can learn to do is change the way you look at the world in general, and that's called an explanatory style. How you explain the world to yourself. What is your style in explaining the world to yourself? We now know that depressed people have a different explanatory style than non-depressed people. There are 3 ways for sure that depressed people explain, the 3 methods that they explain the world to themselves that non-depressed people don't. And the first one is they have a way of personalizing things. They blame themselves. They see themselves as responsible for like every bad thing, whether it's things happening just to them or things that are happening to people around them. I mean, you'll hear sometimes people blaming themselves because their parents got divorced, and they'll actually feel like if I was a better child, my parents would still be together. Depressed people also have a way of taking things that happen and making something specific into something global. You'll see a depressed person say, see, I told you I'm a failure. I told you I'm a loser. Meanwhile, they did poorly on one test. The non-depressed person says, oh, that test kicked my butt. Well, I wish I'd studied more of X and less of Y, but I'll get it next time. The depressed person just says, no, this is more proof. I told you I can't do this stuff. I'm a failure. I'm a loser. And the third thing they do is they project doom and gloom into the future. And that's all of that contributes to depression. And that's the opposite of how optimists or that's the opposite of how we teach people to think if they're wanting to learn optimism.
All right. Well, I tell you what, I've got some follow-up questions to all of that, but I'm going to save them until after the break. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back here in just a couple of minutes. You're listening to Building Strong Minds with Dr. Christopher Cortman right here on tncradio.live. Stay right there.
This blog is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. Team driving with your spouse. Is it for you? Trucking's an exciting career with many opportunities. Although there are many benefits to being a truck driver, such as freedom on the open road and seeing new places, there's still negative sides like loneliness and boredom. Truck driving is also difficult for your marriage. Being away from your spouse for days or weeks at a time makes it challenging to have a happy and healthy marriage. Thankfully, truck drivers have the option to team drive with their spouse. Forming a husband and wife trucking team can be a great opportunity to spend time together and travel the United States while making good money. Now, like any other job, driving with your spouse has pros and cons. Stay with me to find out if team driving with your spouse is right for you. Now, the pros of team driving with your spouse. Faster delivery. Due to the FMCSA's hours of service regulations, truck drivers can only drive up to 11 hours a day. Any driving after 11 hours will result in a penalty and a bad safety score. Truckers on average will drive up to 55-60 miles an hour. After their 11-hour shift, that adds up to a little over 600 miles a day. When you drive with your spouse, you can drive more miles. While you're finishing your 11-hour shift, your spouse can be resting and getting ready for their shift. This allows drivers to complete more miles a day, which in return leads to a faster delivery. You won't feel lonely. Driving alone can lead to developing mental health issues later on in your trucking career. Studies show that depression and anxiety are some of the most common mental health issues in drivers today. Team driving with your spouse eliminates feeling lonely on the road. Having your spouse with you on the road gives you someone to talk to and enjoy your daily activities with. Make more money. A single truck driver makes less money per mile than one whose team drives. Why is that? Well, with two drivers, you're completing more miles each day, and therefore you reach your destination much quicker. Cons of team driving with your spouse. Difficulty getting along. They say that distance makes the heart grow fonder, and that's true. It can be difficult to get along with your spouse when you're in a small space for weeks at a time. You may find yourself wanting alone time to pursue your hobbies and interests. When you decide to team drive, you give up the possibility of any alone time in your truck. Lack of sleep. To make team driving work, your spouse will have to rest while you complete your shift of driving. Sleeping in a truck cab, especially if your spouse is noisy, can be difficult. As a truck driver, it's essential to have a good night's rest before hitting the road. Getting the right amount of sleep is not only good for your overall health, but it also makes you more alert and cautious when driving. Harder to find trucking insurance. If you decide that team driving is for you and your spouse, you might have trouble finding a commercial truck insurance company that'll write your insurance. When you team drive, your truck never stops. Therefore, the truck is at risk for higher exposure to accidents. Your truck's also more liable to having maintenance issues, which can result in getting violations. Conclusion? Driving with your spouse has many pros and cons. Our advice to you is to take a look at the pros and cons and determine if this is the right career path for you and your spouse. Trucking with your spouse can lead to many great memories. This blog was brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
You're listening to TNCRadio.live. Remember to tune into the Truckers Network radio show with Shelley Johnson, weekdays at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern.
There hasn't been so much good snapping since West Side Story. TNCRadio.live, building strong minds. I'm Tom Kelly. And here with Dr. Christopher Cortman, we're talking about forgiveness. And today we're looking at optimism. And I'm excited to be looking at optimism.
Good attitude. It's already working.
Yeah, it's you were talking about people who are not optimists. Pessimism, I think, can take on a lot of different forms. And, in today's political climate, I find the constant need to find fault with the people who are not in your political party.
Right.
To be, in a way, the worst part of pessimism, because you're just looking for people to fail. You're looking for policies to fail and, did you hear what the president said this time? Regardless of who the president is. And, to me, it's often a self-fulfilling prophecy because no president's going to do it all right. Nobody's going to get it perfect. And so all you got to do is wait for the next gaffe or the next statement that you think was inappropriate or the next, economic turn that didn't go the way you thought it should go. And there you go. See, I told you this was going to be a bad president. And, you can always find fault in people like that. And people spend their whole lives some people make a lot of money out of pointing out the faults of other people and somehow proving that, I told you I was wrong, or I told you I was right that they would be wrong. And I don't know. It just, to me, that I get really tired of that really quickly.
Well, you're talking about the big business of media, and we are in a very tribalistic kind of society where things are pretty much split down the middle with an us and them mindset. No matter who the us is, there's a them on the other side, the other half. And there are certain television stations, for instance, who are very slanted towards one side and against the other side. And they make a living off of arousing our nervous systems by getting us furiously enraged with the other side and frightening us as to how the other side is going to lead us into the end times or economic ruin or World War III or whatever it is that's being forecast. And what we often don't see is that it's designed to keep us watching because it's all sponsored by corporate America. And in order to buy their products, we have to watch the programs, and they know how to keep us watching is by arousing our nervous systems. And those are the two emotions that are likely to keep humans watching. One is anger and rage, and the other is fear and anxiety. So they do a really good job at upsetting us and teaching us how bad the other side is, to keep that fuel that upset. We can't believe that we're all going to work together. And if we all worked together and there was peace and harmony, we wouldn't watch the news so much. So it's a manipulation.
So in much the same way that optimism can be taught, don't you think it's clear that media teaches us to be pessimist because that sells more?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a message, though, that you are a complete and total loser in a world that's going to hell in a handbasket. But if you buy this product, it's all going to be okay.
Whatever product that happens to
be, that will come to your rescue, you pathetic loser of a person. Kind of like right. Cute guy, but that dandruff, and so there's Head and Shoulders available. And in the next scene, of course, the cute guy is surrounded by 3 hot chicks. Proof that there's hope even for you.
Okay, well then, so pessimism, here's your hope, and this is how we'll sell things.
Exactly.
Got it. I think by knowing that, if people realize that people are trying to manipulate them like that, maybe they can be more on guard for it.
I would encourage people to be more mindful of that, because the goal is really not so much to protect you from those bleeping liberals or conservatives or Democrats or Republicans. It's to keep you watching. We need you to keep watching. And in the process, we know you're watching because you're on our team, and we're going to share with you how right we are and how we have been terribly wronged by the other side. And in fact, politicians are not dramatically different from one another.
No.
No matter what side of the aisle they line up on.
No. Yeah. So,
but back to the optimism, we can learn how to have a mindset that says, for instance, this difficult thing we're going through is temporary. Whereas a pessimist sees the doom and gloom lasting forever. The optimist says, yeah, we're going to get through this. Life has hard times. It's okay. And an optimist will say, yeah, there's going to be struggles, but it's all part of the big picture. And ultimately, we're going to succeed. This is going to turn out for the best. And that is a tremendously hopeful and helpful explanatory style. And it can be learned. Tom, I was speaking at a gifted school. I have a relationship with the principal at the #1 school in the state of Florida, which is essentially in our backyard here in Sarasota. And these kids are just brilliant. And they invite me to do seminars there, and every year to speak to the freshmen with my social black belt program. And one time I'm talking about optimism, and this 9th grader, 14-year-old boy, raises his hand and says, I'm listening to you, but wouldn't it make more sense to think realistically than optimistically? And I looked at the boy and I said, that's a fantastic question. And my answer is no. And here's why. There's not a problem with thinking realistically. But let me give you an example about where optimism comes in. You have a shirt on that says, and it probably said something like Colgate or a school for smart kids. And I said, I don't even know if you're ever going to go to that school. This is a freshman in high school. I don't know what school you're going to go to, but let's say for argument's sake that you're going to go to Colgate. And I don't even know if they have a football team, but let's say they do. And this weekend, they're playing against Alabama. And you want to be an optimistic thinker. And I'm going to tell you, you are not going to beat Alabama. In fact, you're going to lose 76-3 or something like that. And so why am I telling you to think positively or to think optimistically? And the answer is not because I'm going to give you a faulty idea on what's going to happen. You're going to get creamed. But here's the optimism. Isn't it cool that we can go to a football game this weekend and we could see a fantastic team like Alabama up close? Isn't it great that we live in a country where we have the freedom and the opportunity to do things like this? Isn't it fantastic that on a Saturday afternoon, we can hang out with 75,000 of our closest friends and have a really fun time, even though our school is going to be creamed? Isn't it wonderful to have an education? Optimism doesn't mean you have to lie to yourself about facts. We don't sing "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas" and thinking it's going to happen in Florida. We know any white Christmas is the sand outside on the beach. We're not getting snow. That's not optimism. That's foolishness. Optimism isn't it fantastic that if it's 75 degrees, we can have a beautiful day and celebrate Christmas outside? Or isn't it fantastic that we have a holiday like this, that we could celebrate the birth of our Savior, or whatever it is? But optimism is about looking at the big picture and saying, I am blessed. Isn't it great to have an opportunity to live a lifetime? Isn't it great to have the love of my family? Isn't it awesome to have friends like you, opportunities like this, a job that pays the bills? That's what I'm talking about. That's an optimistic attitude.
And I think that helps me a lot to think of, those ways. And look at St. Peter's.
Yeah.
For those listening on the broadcast later, St. Peter's just lost yesterday. Was it yesterday?
Yeah, they finally were eliminated in the Elite Eight. They didn't make the Final Four.
But no school at that size and that ranking, no school in history had ever made it past the Sweet 16. In fact, they were huge underdogs in every game they played. So it was, fully expected that they would lose the first game that they played and the second game that they played and the third game. You can always be right if you're a pessimist at some level, right?
One of the joys of pessimism is that the only time that you're disappointed is when things go well.
That's right. And you can sit there and say, see, I told you he was going to die.
That's right.
Yeah, you got me again. You're right. Yeah, he did, just like you said.
It's a very self-protective way to think.
Uh-huh.
Pessimism is like, I will venture nothing that could end up hurting me. It reminds me of my old way of thinking about mating and dating. I never heard any woman say no to me because I would not ask anyone out unless I was 100% certain they would say yes. And that was because I had a fear of rejection, Tom. So I was not going to take any risks that might set me up for that. And as a result, I wasn't rejected, but at the same time, I passed up a lot of really good opportunities that I only found out later on because I didn't have the guts to take any risks, to extend myself, to try, to run the risk of loss, of failure, of defeat, of rejection, all those things that we don't like. And so as a pessimist, you're really protecting yourself against difficult things happening in life by saying, I expect things are always going to go poorly. But now we know just being optimistic improves your sleep. You know, we know that you have a lower risk of heart disease. You know, there's a University of Michigan study that found out that you have a lower risk of a stroke. And a Pittsburgh study found that women had a 30% lower risk of heart disease just by being optimistic. I mean, it's amazing how the mind and body work together. Imagine being pregnant, and just by being an optimist, you increase your chances of a positive outcome. And being that negative person, that pessimistic person, you decrease those same chances.
But you get to say you're right more often.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of which, I'm right in looking at that it's time for a break, and we'll be back here in just a couple of minutes. Keep listening. TNCRadio.live. We'll be right back after this.
Hi, I'm Dr. Christopher Cortman, and now for the Mental Health Minute. There was an excellent movie from years ago called City Slickers. Laughed a lot, enjoyed it very much. It featured some urban-type guys taking a week's vacation, learning to be cowboys. And they showed them riding endlessly horseback and trying to figure out things to talk about. In one episode, they played a game called Worst Day, Best Day. And they shared with each other the worst day of their lives and what happened, and also the best day. One cowboy wannabe was talking about his childhood, and he described a scene where his mother and father were fighting yet again, and his father was aggressive with his mother. And the story he told is that he finally got up the nerve as a boy to get up in his father's face and say, "You get out of here." And he said, "My father left and he never came back." And there was a sense of quiet. And then finally someone changed the subject by saying, "Okay, best day." And he said, "Same day." Sometimes going through the worst thing in our lives gives us the opportunity to grow and turn things into the best ever. I have a patient now, a young lady who was in a car wreck while she was drinking, and she hurt some people. And she's ashamed and she feels terribly about what she did. But she also knows that she has the opportunity now to become sober and to become the very best version of herself, all because she turned the worst day into the best day.
TNCRadio.live, your commercial driver navigation station.
Welcome in, TNCRadio.live. I'm Tom Kelly. We're here with Dr. Chris Cortman in Building Strong Minds. And Dr. Chris, wanted to ask you kind of a side question here. You spend your life listening to others. And I teach,
most of the time, yes.
I'm sorry, what were you saying? Yeah. But listening is really a lost art these days. The way we consume information and the way we converse with each other really isn't about listening anymore. At least it doesn't seem like that to me. And so over time, as you've spent so much, 75,000 hours listening to other people and them doing most of the talking, how do you do that? How do you stay engaged when that's usually not the easy thing to do?
The easiest thing to do is not always the best thing to do, but the best thing to do for sure is to validate another person. Virginia Satir wrote that the purpose for communication is validation, that we reach out to one another, even on an elevator with a complete stranger, and we say something like, nice weather we're having, or love those shoes, or whatever it is we say, because we're validating that you're here and I'm here. And I want to acknowledge that we both have something in common. We're here at the same time. Or humans want to be validated. They want to be understood. And the greatest gift that I can ever give somebody is validation. When, I can think back to 11 o'clock this morning, I had a new patient, and I told him, what I'm hearing from you is that you, and he said, you got it spot on. And I could tell that meant everything to him, because somebody out there not only was listening, but it made sense to them. So how strange, how weird, how crazy can I really be if somebody says, yeah, I get that. This is what you're telling me, isn't it? It's such a wonderful thing. It's, with the advent of the internet, so many people who thought they were just so bizarre in their thinking found out that there were groups of people just like them. There were people who had the same preference or the same weird phobia or the same fetish or whatever their thing was. They weren't alone in the world. Somebody else, lots of other people, even thousands of other people had that same thing going on. How cool was that? How validating was that to know that I'm not that strange. I'm not that weird. Somebody out there can understand me. And so that all goes back to how important is it to listen? It's everything. It helps somebody to realize, among other things, that they're worth listening to. Today, we give people the tools to see so many different things in a short period of time. We have social media where they have very, very quick videos, and people will, on my mental health minutes, some will even write and say, wow, I listened to your whole mental health minute. I don't usually. People have said to me, I read your whole Christmas letter. It's 2 pages. I read the whole thing. I don't usually read. People have such a short attention span these days because, we have so much distraction and so many opportunities. There's people listening to you, or they're supposed to be, but they've got a cell phone in their hands and they're literally going through their text messages while someone's talking to them. And so undivided attention, it's almost like a rare gift from our ancestors to actually maintain eye contact, to smile when someone's talking when it's appropriate, or laugh out loud because you're really listening to them and you picked up the subtlety in their humor. It's an amazing gift. And I'm always assuming that most of my audience on this show is male, and I know it's not 100% that way, but if it's true that most truck drivers are male, what I would say to you guys is maybe the greatest gift you can give to your wives and partners is just being an excellent listener. Just put everything down when she goes to talk. Drop the remote, drop the phone. I'm getting a look from my girlfriend right now, like, yeah, like you do this. Anyway, just having the wherewithal to give your undivided attention sends a message that you are the priority. And if I can even do better than that and not only listen, but make sense of it and say, what I hear you saying is this, that's even better. And if I could say, I completely agree with you, you just scored. That's tic-tac-toe right there. You got them all. Because that's what she wants more than anything, is to know that you care enough to listen, that you understand her. It's such a beautiful form of attraction. is to know that I'm interested in you and I'm actually excited when you talk to me, that I want to hear what you have to say because I want to know you better, and that we have a lot in common because I share that very same framework or that point of view.
There are so many different places I'd want to take this, but let's go here. For people who want to become better listeners, and I'm not talking about those who want to look like they're better listeners, but people who are actually wanting to become better listeners, how would you direct them?
Very first thing I would say is try to do one thing at a time, which is listen. Don't be doing anything else. Give your undivided attention to whatever it is you want to listen to. And if in fact you feel like something's getting ahead of you, it's really okay to say, excuse me for 1 minute. Before you move on to that next point, let me make sure I understand what you were saying. Because that demonstrates that I'm listening so well that I want clarification. I'm allowed to ask questions to clarify. Another thing I would do is just to, do the active listening thing, which is to say, I want to make sure that I got it. You're saying that it doesn't matter to you if I spend all Sunday afternoon watching football games as long as I can hang out with you Sunday night. Did you just say that? Did I get that right? And then, of course, you heard, no, that's not what I meant. No, but it's important to reflect back what you've heard to make sure that you are a good listener, to make sure that you did get it right. When people are working with me in therapy, Tom, some of the better students / clients will have a pen and a pad, and they'll say, I really like what you just said. Would you stop a moment? I want to write that down. I heard you say. That's not only flattering, like I finally said something worthwhile, but what they're saying is, I want to remember this. I want to use this. I want to practice this. If you want to be a good listener, sometimes, you can say, wow, I never thought about that. Give me a second. I want to write that down. Or let me say that back to you because I really like that. Are you telling me that you think the earth is not really flat after all? Is that what I heard you say? You want to say back what the main message is, so that the person knows that you're listening and so that you can reinforce what it is you heard, because anything that we repeat, we're more likely to remember.
Fantastic. It's break time, so let's take a break, come back, and got a few more things to follow up with you on before we end. Can you believe the hour's almost over? Time Amazing. Always flies by. We'll be back here in just a couple of minutes with Dr. Chris Cortman on Building Strong Minds here on TNCRadio.live.
Becoming a truck driver is not an easy task. You have to meet several requirements. After reviewing and meeting the requirements, you'll need to obtain a CDL, or a commercial driver's license, through the DMV in your state. To get your CDL, you must pass a knowledge and skills test. Many drivers attend a trucking school to help prepare them for the tests. After successfully passing the CDL test, you now have your Class A CDL. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, there's a little bit more to becoming a professional truck driver than just passing a few exams and getting your CDL. Trucking, as you may know, is not an easy career. It can be stressful, dangerous, lonely, and emotionally draining. Drivers need to make it a priority to become fully prepared for life on the road. Being prepared for life on the road can help avoid unnecessary mistakes and losses. Attending a trucking school is one way for drivers to prepare themselves for their new adventure. However, drivers don't always learn everything they need to be successful during their time at trucking school. Trucking schools will cover the basics for classroom instruction and in-driving modules, but new drivers need to learn more than just the basics. How do new drivers acquire the right training? The Truckers Network is proudly partnering with Advanced Pre-Employment Training, which is a training course for both professional drivers and trucking companies. Advanced Pre-Employment Training helps grow your industry knowledge by providing training courses on all the important topics for becoming a successful driver. These include pre-trip inspection, company representation, communication, document organization, bill of lading, refrigeration units, weight and axles, safety, and industry knowledge. Their focus points are to increase stability and growth in the business, eliminate mistakes and financial losses, maintain company safety ratings, and eliminate drivers and owner-operators quitting or losing their jobs. The Truckers Network members can now save 5% off advanced pre-employment training courses by using our exclusive promo code. Become a member today of the Truckers Network and save instantly on the industry's best products and services. Visit the Truckers Network website at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. That's app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
Be sure to catch the Truckers Network radio show with your host, Shelley Johnson, weekdays at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on tncradio.live.
Everybody, snap along. All right, welcome back in tncradio.live. I'm Tom Kelly here with Dr. Chris Cortman. Dr. Chris talking about all sorts of different things. We've been talking about forgiveness, and the O in our acrostic is optimism. And you touched on something earlier, and I think I've been remiss in following up more on this. Tell us, when you're over talking to the School for the Gifted and those kinds of things, you're talking about this program you've put together called Social Black Belt. What is that, and how does that apply to students and to the rest of us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. A social black belt is it's a concept that I came up with that emanates from martial arts. That if you had a black belt in the martial arts, you would have the highest level of training. When my kids started on their particular brand, they had Taekwondo and another one did Jiu-Jitsu. They started off with different colors like yellow belts and white belts, but the black belt is the highest level of training. So if you had a black belt in martial arts, you wouldn't look for trouble, but you could handle anything that came your way. So my thought was, what if there was such a thing as a social black belt? And that is the highest level of training on mental health issues. And so about 13 years now ago, I had a book published called Your Mind, an Owner's Manual for a Better Life. And the book featured 10 psychological truths that for whatever reason, we don't teach people. And the book was written for adults. And it was just these simple things that we should be teaching children, and humans, where their feelings come from and what their feelings mean. And we don't teach that. So, I thought, what if we could do this now, since the book was written for adults? What if we could do this and teach it in a preventative manner? And, 12 years ago, I had a principal say, come into our school. She kind of rolled out the red carpet for my partner and myself. And we taught the freshmen the 10 truths of the social black belt. And much to our pleasure, we had a little bit of research that demonstrated that they were statistically significantly superior. There's a tongue twister.
Easy for you to say.
For me, yeah, and superior to the control group. And the long and short of it is that the people in our group improved 50% over the control group just by taking this class. And so we've had good success in a school like Pineview, which is the creme de la creme, and even in a second chance school where, by definition, every kid in the school had been kicked out or expelled out of another school to go to this school. And just teaching them these truths, but also giving them the opportunity to talk about their own lives in a safe way. So this past week, I was invited into a local high school and essentially had 45 minutes. And then you can't teach my whole social black belt program in 45 minutes. But I just began asking the kids some questions like, where do your feelings come from? And they didn't know. I mean, they said your brain. It's like, well, yeah, obviously not the anus, the brain. But what I'm saying is, how do you create feelings? And most people, even adults, assume that their feelings come from situations or other people, things that are going on in their lives. And that's not correct. The truth is, my feelings come from the way I interpret the world to myself. In other words, we're back to my explanatory style, right? The way I explain the world to myself is what causes my human emotions. That's why we were talking about optimism. If I'm an optimistic person, I'm much less likely to suffer from a clinical depression because I'm thinking in ways that are not likely to create a depression. I'm not likely to create an anxiety disorder. Anxiety is all about the future, right? When you're worried about things, when you catastrophize things in your mind, you create anxiety. Well, if you're an optimist, if you're telling yourself things are going to be okay, if you're a person of faith who actually thinks that all things work together for good, to those who are called according to God's purpose, if you actually believe things like that, and you practice thinking like that, you're much less likely to succumb to an anxiety disorder or to a depression. And now the research is saying you're going to die easier and you're going to live longer, you're less likely to have a stroke, you're more likely to sleep better, you're more likely to be confident, you're more likely to recover from cancer, you're more likely to have good outcomes when you're pregnant. I mean, just by thinking well. So back to the social black belt. It's teaching 10 truths to people of all ages that they should have already been taught. The original title of my book was 10 Things Someone Should Have Taught You by Now. But the publishing company wanted to change it to Your Mind and Owner's Manual. And now we have the book that's rewritten just for adolescents, and it's called The Social Black Belt, which is the same 10 truths that are in that first book I mentioned, which is Your Mind and Owner's Manual for a Better Life. Anyway, the point is we can teach things from an early age to children that will help them with their entire lives. They'll be healthier human beings if they learn basic emotional and mental health skills.
Given that some people are slow on the uptake, and sometimes are not, they didn't progress through their adolescence as well, so they tend to be emotionally immature. Some people, wouldn't the social black belt be helpful to them? I mean, you don't have to be an adolescent to read it, right?
No, absolutely not. Again, the original book was written for adults, and it was like, here's 10 truths you should have been taught by now.
Yeah.
But now there's the Social Black Belt book. It was rewritten just for lessons. But the point is, learn these things at any age. It's never too late. The 10th truth is predicated upon the myth that's taught to every one of us. Time heals all wounds.
Right.
That's what they teach us when we have a trauma. That's what they teach us when we have grief. A precious person or animal in our lives dies, and they say, time heals all wounds. Time just passes.
I hate to cut you off, but we're going to have to stop it there. How can people find your website?
It's srqshrink.com.
srqshrink.com. It's not for Syracuse. That's for Sarasota.
Syracuse. That's
so,
right.
All right. Hey, we got to run. We got TFC's Trucker's Life coming up next. So stay tuned right here. tncradio.live. tradio.live. 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 tradio.